Do you remember during the COVID-19 pandemic, during the Trump administration, like in the first few months or so, that we were talking about, he was up there, he'd be talking about stuff, and one of the things that he was concerned about was he believed that the cure can't be worse than the problem itself. He was concerned about shutdowns and making people, distance learn, making people work from home if possible, making sure that, we enabled it so that people would be able to socially distance and mask up and get vaccinated and do whatever it is that we need to do, even though the vaccines didn't come out till the very end of his presidency. He always told us that the cure couldn't be worse than the problem itself. But that's exactly what Elon Musk is doing. Nuclear workers. NBC News. Trump administration wants to unfire nuclear safety workers but can't figure out how to reach them. The workers whose agency oversees the nation's nuclear stockpile had been fired on Thursday and lost access to their federal government email accounts. National Nuclear Secretary Administration officials on Friday attempted to notify some employees who had been let go the day before that they are now due to be reinstated, but they struggled to find them because they didn't have their new contact information. In an email sent to employees at NNSA and obtained by NBC News, officials wrote the termination letters for some NNSA probationary employees are being rescinded. We do not have a good way to get in touch with those personnel. Well, how dumb are you? Again, as I said on the last show, as I'll continue to say, measure twice, cut once. Measure twice, cut once. They're not doing that. They're hacking everything to pieces and then seeing what ends up getting broken and then trying to put everything back together again. But Humpty Dumpty, after he had his great fall, couldn't be put back together again. Maybe their version of the nursery rhymes, whatever, that tell them that if somebody lies all the time, they should continue believing the lies, because what if they tell the truth one day? Just like that, their bad understanding of The Boy Who Cried Wolf, maybe they also have a bad understanding of Humpty Dumpty. And maybe their version, they heard, oh, all the king's horses and all the king's men put Humpty Dumpty back together as if nothing was wrong, no problem here, nothing to see here, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. The individuals the letter refers to had been fired on Thursday and lost access to federal government email accounts. NNSA, which is within the Department of Energy and oversees the nation's nuclear stockpile, cannot reach these employees directly and is now asking recipients of the email, please work with your supervisors to send this information to people's personal contact emails. Well, why were you dumb enough to fire them without making sure, A, that they weren't people you should fire, and B, without making sure that you had contact information just in case? But again, measure twice, cut once. They're not doing that. They're all going willy-nilly. Oh, we can just cut all these probationary people because they're not civil service, and as such, they're not protected by the requirements that are put forward for them. And since they didn't take the so-called deal that Donald Trump wanted them to take, instead they said, nope, since you're probationary, we can fire you because we feel like it. See you later. Have a good one. Now, would you want to go back to that administration? Would you want to be reinstated as a worker for the federal government underneath a person who just fired you because they're a freaking dumbass? I wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't want to go back. I mean, I guess it's understandable that in a tough economy that you actually, might have to consider it, but why would you go back and then not immediately start looking for another job? Because that's what I would do. I would go back, but I would immediately start looking for another job. And if people ask me why I'm looking for another job, I'd be like, because I was let go one day, and then the next day I was unlet go, and I don't feel like I have a stable position here, so therefore I'm looking for something else a little more stable. But I don't know how anybody can feel stable working for Donald Trump's federal government either. But it's not just the nuclear workers. It's the farmers in USA Aid, for example. They cut all sorts of funding for all sorts of programs. And many of those programs, the funds to get the food to send people who needed the food were sent to American farmers. American farmers were doing the work to help fill the needs of these U.S. aid agencies, and so that money that would be spent went in part to domestic producers, domestic agriculture producers, etc. So now you're going to have food that is going to go bad, if they're fruit or vegetables, in the ground, on the trees, whatever. If they're already picked, they're going to go bad that way too. You can't can everything, right? Especially if he has tariffs on all the materials that might be used to make cans. But the problem is not just the fact that you're cutting food that's needed to go to individuals who are starving. So your cuts are going to harm people. Again, as Donald Trump says, the cure can't be worse than the problem itself. So if the cure ends up killing hundreds of thousands of people because they can't get fed anymore because they relied on this program and no longer can get it, then the cure is absolutely going to be worse than the problem. But under the whole measure twice, cut once deal, they apparently didn't realize the fact that as they cut those programs, the funds are going to not go to the American farmers, who are now again going to be hurt by another one of Donald Trump's policies. The farmers were hurt back in his first term because he set up these tariffs, and the Chinese government that, China gets a lot of their soy from the United States, and they said, okay, we'll just get soy from somewhere else and retaliate against your horrible tariffs. And then Donald Trump had to take all of the money that was coming in via the tariffs and had to then give it to the farmers, or else they'd get screwed. But it's worse than that. What happens now? Now that they're not stable, now that these farmers know that this money can't be relied on to be, spent on their goods, they're going to cut production. If I was running a business and I felt like I had a bunch of money that was coming in that I could rely on coming in every single year to help, grow food for the starving people across the world, and the federal government is paying me to make sure that I could get that done, and now I'm relying on the federal government for that, and I don't know if the funds can come in, what else would I do except cut back on production? So if a farmer starts cutting back on production of what he produces, what's going to happen at that point? What if then Donald Trump decides to do another, mea culpa, instead of firing, the nuclear workers, we're now, and then having to reinstate them, maybe he'll be like, we made a mistake. We didn't mean to cut off these funds because we don't want to hurt the American farmer, so we're going to reinstate these programs to make sure that the American farmers can be paid. But of course, where's the food going to go if they do that? But still, how long is it going to take the American farmer to ramp back up their production to be able to meet the needs that they were already fulfilling under U.S. aid before? Because I guarantee you, it's not going to be able to be done, just like this. Once they stop, budgeting for, having additional farm hands or anybody else working for those farmers, once they have to cut back and scale back on who they employ, scale back their operations because they no longer could afford to make as much and produce as much as they would normally produce because they're not having the USAID money coming in. And then if they come back and say, we made a mistake, let's start this program again, you're not going to be able to start it again immediately. It's going to take time. And in that time it takes to, re-up themselves, more people are going to die. And we tried to tell you here on Liberal Dan Radio, Talk from the Left, that's right, and various other left-wing, leaning, progressive, liberal, etc. policies or podcasts. We tried to tell you that Donald Trump's policies would be harmful like this. But y'all wouldn't believe us. And now you're finding out. You're in the find out phase. What else? What else? Who else can Donald Trump administrations kill with their policies or allow to die with their policies? In Umzimklulu, if I pronounced that incorrectly, I'm sorry, South Africa, a rural village in South Africa's KwaZulu-Natal province, Unemployed 19-year-old Nezuko Majola is trying to figure out if she has enough money for a 1-hour ride to collect her much-needed HIV medication because, guess what? These USA aid cuts have basically made it so that these clinics have to now shut their doors. Majola is one of millions of patients in South Africa affected by U.S. President Donald Trump's global foreign freeze on aid, raising worries about HIV patients defaulting on treatment, infection rates going up, and eventually a rise in deaths. In 2024, think tank Human Sciences Research Council released figures showing that Majola's province recorded the second highest HIV prevalence in the country at 16%, with at least 1,300 young people estimated to contract the disease every week. Every week, 1,300 young people get HIV. It's not that this province has 1,300 overall cases. They get 1,300 cases per week. And Donald Trump, by rescinding all this funding that would be cut from U.S. aid, is now going to cause these people to be more at risk of death because they can't get access to the medicine that they so surely need. And of course, we've already seen in the United States that there are employers who are trying to demand that they not have to cover PrEP to prevent HIV transmission or to prevent it from infecting you after being exposed to it, that they shouldn't have to cover all these other drugs because, it's only a gay disease or whatever, like they said in the 80s, because apparently we've reverted back to the 80s. But, even though they feel that way, there are lots of heterosexual folks who have HIV, especially in these areas, that are now going to be put more at risk. I mean, it used to be that HIV was a death sentence. Now, with the proper medication, it doesn't have to be. You can live a full life while taking these drugs, but you have to take these drugs. And if you don't take the drugs, you're more likely than not to suffer the consequences of getting HIV. I'm not saying it's a consequence, is something you ask for, because nobody asked to get that. But still, many, many more people are going to die because of this action. And this is not going to be an exhaustive list of ways that people are going to die because Donald Trump and his bad decisions and President Musk's bad decisions and the fact that they refuse to measure twice, cut once, to help make sure that any cuts that are done reasonably and responsibly. Because I'm not going to sit here and tell you that you shouldn't cut unnecessary spending from government. I'm all for cutting unnecessary spending in government. I'll always use the example of the tanks and jets that our Congress buys and pays for, and basically approves money to go to their campaign contributors, i.e. the people in the military-industrial complex, and then they just sit on a tarmac. They sit in a parking lot. They're never used because the military doesn't want these damn things. That's fraud, waste, and abuse right there. It's a very easy one to cut. But they're not going to do it. Why? Because they want to pay back the military-industrial complex. They want to make sure to be able to invest in those, I guess, to be able to keep earning their millions and billions of bucks. They're just not going to stop doing that. But they're going to cut off funding for food grown by American farmers that go to starving people across the world. They're going to cut off funding to AIDS medicine to people who are suffering across the world. And again, more people are going to die unnecessarily because of Donald Trump and his irresponsibility, and Elon Musk and his irresponsibility, and again, their refusal to just measure twice before cutting. Because look, at the end of the day, you should always measure twice before cutting, even if it's pertaining to carpentry, if it's pertaining to budgets, and especially if it's pertaining to circumcision. Always measure twice, so you'd only have to cut once. Anyway, what do you think? Agree, disagree? Leave your comments down below. Remember to like the video, share it, subscribe to the channel. And of course, unless you're a Nazi, have a good day.